Welcome to the Runetech Archives. Book 1, Bronze and Blood. Chapter 4, Wreckage and Memories. Callen decided to stick around and help me put the pieces of my life back together. Even if we weren't friends, he would have done the same. That's the kind of guy he was. One of the few who still believed the badge meant something. Not the medal, not the institution, but the idea. "This place looks like a crime scene," Callen said as he started gathering books. "That explains why it seems like you know your way around," I said, dragging a half smile across my face to hide the pain. He let out a dry little ha-ha. It was about as much enthusiasm as you'd expect from someone on unpaid overtime. "We should call this in," Callen suggested. "It's sticky with all that paperwork?" Callen stopped and gave me a long, sideways look. "I don't have time to deal with all that," I said, answering his glare. "Like you said, time is ticking." I could see the internal debate in his head. Calling it in would be proper procedure, but it would also burn what little time I had to attempt to figure out what the hell was going on. Someone had to try and prove my innocence. We decided to start on opposite ends of the workshop. Divide and conquer, as they say. The books went first. Better to get them off the ground before one of us crushed a first edition under a boot. Most were in one piece, just thrown about or laying face down, their spines bent to the point of surrender. I picked up my copy of Sparks of the Divine Engine by Alara Quinn, former engineer of the Etheric Transit Authority, and winced as a few loose pages slipped free and drifted to the floor. Part memoir, part manifesto. It explored how cities harnessed ether after the Great Burnout, why the old reactors still hummed long after the world had stopped listening. A book about keeping civilization alive after it tore itself apart. The irony that my copy was now falling to pieces wasn't lost on me. I slid it back onto the shelf gently, like it might sigh in relief. People like to say knowledge was power. For me, it was something closer to need. I collected books, tombs, anything tied to Runetech or how the world changed that I could get my hands on. Not for profit, not for leverage, just to have. Seeing them like that, battered, broken, discarded, made my chest tighten. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd stored on these shelves until I saw them torn apart. "I would love to know who did this," I muttered, half defeated. "Need to send them a bill for all these damaged books." That earned a dry chuckle from Callen. He was already piling several thick volumes into his arms to shelve at once. Show off. The rain outside never stopped, just tapped its slow rhythm against the glass, like the city humming its own tired theme song. The faint undertone of current lines running through the walls added a low harmony. The air inside carried its usual cocktail of dust, ink, and copper. Dust motes drifted in the pale bottle glass light from the windows, shimmering like suspended ash. I nearly stepped on the fundamentals of etheric stability, one of the directorate-issued texts I've been forced to own. I stopped mid-step, saw the title glinting up at me, and let my boot fall anyway. The satisfying thud made me smile, then I bent down and picked it up. Another Bureau-approved manual, every page read like a lawsuit waiting to happen. Don't etch beyond your clearance. Don't channel outside Bureau protocols. Don't think too much either. That part's implied. Pretty sure this was the first time it had ever been opened, and only because someone had thrown it. It took almost an hour to get all the books back into something resembling order. Loose pages still covered the floor like autumn leaves. I debated sweeping them straight into the fireplace, but Callen was already kneeling down, stacking them neatly. The bastard even aligned the corners. A particular sheet caught his eye. He paused, lifted it, and raised an eyebrow. It was an old bureau flyer, edges curling like it wanted to escape. Big, bold letters across the top screamed, "Keeping the world humming." Below, a man in a crisp uniform held a copper coil like it was scripture. The smile didn't reach his eyes. "You actually have one of these lying around?" Callen asked. "They make fantastic kindling," I said wryly. "Do you hear from them much these days?" "Not really. They've left me alone since that little mishap a few years back." Callen didn't move. Ah, that mishap. He carefully set the flyer at the top of his pile like it deserved respect. I groaned. Don't start. Can't help it. That was the one with the St. Helens hounds, right? Nothing wrong with being good at what you do, I called back. Fade, he said, exasperated. Those bikes lit up half a city block when they revved up. You could see blue lightning from a dozen blocks away. Yeah, but they worked, didn't they? Took off like a bat out of hell. He shook his head slowly. And if I hadn't been the first one to get the call? I winced. Yeah, I remember. The memory played back anyway. The smell of oil and ozone, a dozen bikes lined up in an old rail yard, their tanks carved with new sigils I'd etched myself, small, delicate, and experimental. The moment the first engine turned over, blue-green lightning ripped up into the sky, snaking along the copper lines that webbed the district. The resonance hit a pitch high enough to rattle teeth. Half the gang were thrown off their bikes before the second rev. The rest tried to blame me before they could stand up straight. Good thing the cops were faster than they were. Callen had been the first to arrive, happened to be nearby on patrol. Sirens going off, headlights low. He found me crouched behind a half-melted engine casing, wondering if I'd invented flight by accident. He got me into his patrol car before the hounds could chew me up. And when backup showed, they took the rest of the gang in. He'd taken me home instead of downtown. Officially, the report listed an unidentified Runetech as the accomplice. I'd fooled the police, but the Bureau had its own investigators. They found me within a week. It wasn't a major crime, just a little ether mishandling with public risk attached. But it was enough to earn me a permanent spot on their watch list. A black mark stamped behind my name in some dusty file cabinet under the Bureau's marble halls. As always, I said, dragging myself back from memory lane. Thanks for saving my ass. You're welcome, Callen said, crouched as he scooped up the last of the loose papers. We made our way toward the workbench to start on the real damage. The bench itself had survived, heavy, scarred, but still upright, defiant. My desk hadn't been so lucky, but one problem at a time. The top of the bench was a battlefield of tools, scrap copper, and half-finished diagrams for projects I'd been midway through before the chaos. A few pieces still glimmered faintly, their runes pulsing like dying embers. Only a handful of tools were salvageable. The rest were bent or broken beyond hope, and a few were just gone. Breaking them wasn't enough, I muttered, holding a cracked heat quill between my fingers. Had to steal some too. Callen picked up a flux gauge from the debris, holding it up to the light. No matter how many times I see you use this stuff, I'll never understand how any of it works. The lamplight caught the glass face of the gauge. The viscous ether fluid inside sloshed sluggishly with each tilt, casting pale reflections across his hand. You take for granted how mystical your own craft is until someone else looks at it. To me, Runetech is mechanics, predictable, methodical, like tuning a clock. To Callen, it might as well have been sorcery. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that's almost a compliment, I said, half smiling. Don't let it go to your head. He tried not to grin, but failed a little. You know, one of these days you gotta let me take a look at that government issue gear of yours, I said, nodding toward the pistol holstered at his side. I bet I could squeeze a little extra kick out of it. I'd like to keep my job. Thanks. Suit yourself. Law enforcement officers would have had an aneurysm just hearing the suggestion. Independent modification was practically a crime in itself. Once the bench was cleared and rearranged, we moved on to my desk, lying belly up near the door, legs in the air like some old Western holdup. Drawers were scattered around it like casualties. We each grabbed an end. On 3, we heaved it upright. It groaned, but held. I circled around, sliding drawers back into place one by one, while Callen crouched beside the mess of papers that were underneath. He thumbed through each page before setting it aside, another habit he probably learned from evidence collection. Blueprints, sigil patterns, old job notes. Some were plausible designs, others half-mad ideas I'd scroll down at 3 a.m. I can't tell what I'm looking at, he said, stacking them. So I'm just going to assume these are all very legal projects. Of course, officer, I replied with my best, almost sincere tone. He gave a small grunt that might have been a laugh, then quieter. You know, one of these days you're going to take a job for the wrong people, and it's going to bite you in the ass. Hey, a job's a job, I said, not looking up. Besides, the world's not as black and white as they told you in the academy. Callen didn't answer right away. His face softened, the light catching in the scar that ran along his jaw. He wasn't a Boy Scout. He had his morals, his principles, his blueprint for how the world should be, and the grim awareness of how it really was, what the world thought of him. You could see the two fighting behind his eyes, like storm fronts colliding. Me? I didn't have that problem. Well, that about does it, Callen said, shaking off whatever argument was still running behind his eyes. Should we take a look at your apartment? You gotta buy me dinner first, I said wry. Callen didn't dignify my joke with more than a sigh, but he still led the way toward the spiral stairs. I followed him up, each step creaking under our weight. They always creaked, but tonight it sounded like the place was complaining, or warning me. The apartment wasn't much, barely big enough for me and my regrets. The top of the stairs spilled straight into the living room where my second-hand couch, lopsided coffee table, and ancient bookshelf had taken up residence like squatters who'd won a territorial dispute. Callen swept the flashlight across the space. Books and papers weren't as bad up here, but the signs were obvious. Drawers open, cushions tossed, my coat rack knocked over like it had personally offended someone. The little kitchenette alcove was worse. Cabinet doors open, dishes scattered, an entire jar of ground coffee spilled like someone had tried to summon a caffeinated demon. What do you think? I asked. Still looks like home? Looks like a home after a tornado tried filing a noise complaint, he muttered. Fair enough. I guess they searched up here too, he said. After another moment, he added, but this feels a little less objective than the shop. I walked past him, running my fingers along the small shelf crammed with mismatched mugs and of old issues of the Oregonian. The mugs were all there. Newspapers were slightly out of order. Nothing huge. Nothing obviously missing. But something was off. A subtle misalignment, the kind you only notice in hindsight. Like a puzzle you didn't realize was missing a piece until you finally sat down to finish it. I headed down the narrow hallway toward the rest of my cozy little kingdom. Bathroom to the left, mostly untouched unless you counted the shower curtain being half ripped off the rod. The mirror cabinet hung open, bottles rearranged just enough to irritate me. Bedroom to the right, a catastrophe. Sheets tossed aside, mattress skewed, the trunk at the foot of my bed cracked open. My clothes were piled everywhere. Wow, I whispered. They even went through my socks. It's dedication. Callen's flashlight moved slowly, methodically. Looking for something specific? Good question, I said. But what? Because nothing here was worth stealing. Not unless they knew exactly what I owned, exactly what they needed. Callen knelt beside the busted trunk. You keep tools up here? Some, I said. Personal stuff, experiments, things I don't want visitors touching. Think they took any of those things? I opened my mouth and stopped. The feeling was back, that itch at the base of my spine, the sense of absence. Maybe, I said quietly. Hard to tell. The mess is doing a good job of covering the gaps. He hummed, stood, and holstered his flashlight. If something's missing, you'll notice soon enough. Comforting, I said. Really puts me at ease. Callen shook his head but didn't argue. We finished the sweep. Nothing moved, nothing lurking, nothing waiting. Just the echo of people who shouldn't have been here. Back downstairs, I felt heavier. The kind of heaviness that comes with knowing someone walked through your life and left fingerprints on the parts you don't show anyone. Callen exhaled through his nose, stood, and brushed the dust from his hands. You've got a hell of a mess here, Fade. Story of my life. He gave a small nod, the kind that meant be careful, and offered a few parting words of wisdom and concern. The bell above the door jingled once as Callen left, a thin, polite little sound that didn't fit the wreckage it echoed over. Silence rushed in behind him. Not comforting. Almost immediately I missed having a partner in all this mess. I rubbed at my throat where Edric's grip had nearly signed his name. Still tender. Good souvenir. Maybe I'd frame it. The place looked worse without Callen filling the air with cop energy and disappointment. Books half-shelved, stacks of paper everywhere, tools mangled. A domestic disaster if your home decor theme was post-apocalyptic academia. I swallowed and forced myself to breathe. This place was supposed to be safe. Seeing it like this felt like losing ground I didn't know I could afford to lose. I planted my hands on the workbench and bowed my head. The exhaustion finally picked the lock, slipped in, and made itself comfortable. Not panic. I've known panic. This was the kind of tired you feel calling your name into the grave. Too close. Edric's grip, the frame job, the break-in. Everyone seemed invested in me dying tonight. Nice to be popular. The runes in the wall hummed, soft, familiar, usually soothing. Tonight they sounded off balance. Not sharp, not alert, just drowsy. Because they never fired. Because I never activated them. Because I never got a chance before Nix hauled me off in cuffs. I rubbed at my temple. Perfect. One night I don't arm the wards, and the universe schedules a home invasion. Real considerate. The runes kept pulsing, trying their best. Not that it helped after the fact. They were in here, I said aloud, and they touched everything. Bastards. Normally that kind of violation would have lit my fuse. I'd be pacing the room, cursing in 3 languages, threatening to hex the next idiot who breathed in my direction. Tonight, I just felt worn down. Someone had scooped out my insides and replaced them with wet cement. I pushed off the bench and made a slow, pointless circle through the wreckage. Not inspecting, not fixing, just moving. Staying still meant letting the thoughts line up and start giving speeches. My shop had been the one place no one messed with. A myth now, apparently. I let out a huff that might have been a laugh. Of course. Why leave me with a single stable thing? I stopped in the center of the room, exhaled through my nose, and squared my shoulders in the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves they still have shoulders worth squaring. All right, one thing at a time, I said, starting with not screaming. My voice held steady. Sarcasm did its job. The crack in the armor stayed small. The shop was still mine, battered, ransacked, pissed on, symbolically, but mine. Let the night try harder. Thanks for listening to the Runetech Archives. Bronze and Blood is the first book in an upcoming series, with a planned release date of March 2026. This podcast is a narrated preview of the story ahead of launch. If you'd like updates on the book, future chapters, or what's coming next, you can visit the website to sign up for news or go ahead and just follow along on social media. Links to everything are in the episode description below. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next chapter.